Now, I've been building apps for a very long time, and if there's one thing that's going to help you drastically build better apps quicker and with less hassle, it's understanding different patterns. And what is a pattern? A pattern is a proven solution to a repeatable problem. So this is a problem you're going to have over and over and over again in pretty much every app. And a pattern exists that tells you the right way of solving that problem. So if you're looking to build a specific type of app in FlutterFlow or pretty much any other app builder, you're going to be using patterns all the time. They're essentially like Lego pieces that you put together, and the end result is an amazing working app without any bugs that your users love you for. And so in today's video, I'm going to be sharing with you 7 patterns that you should be using in all of your apps. Some of these patterns are going to be relatively simple, but some of these patterns are going to be relatively complex. And make sure you watch until the end of the video, where I'm going to be sharing with you an amazing technique that you can use to build interesting functionality inside of your app or build entire apps all together. Now, before we get started, as always, all the apps that I demonstrate and or build in each one of my videos are available from my Patreon page, and you can see a link to it in the description below. So the first pattern I want to share with you is a very, very simple pattern, but a very, very fundamental pattern. This is a pattern you're going to be using everywhere in pretty much all of your apps, and I still see people struggling with this particular pattern. And this pattern is called the list view detail view pattern. So here I have an app, and in this view I basically have a list of different records, right? In this case, these are cars. So we have Jeep, Tesla, Ford, BMW, Audi. And let's say I click on one of these items and I'm redirected to another view. And this is the detail view. Okay, so it says here car detail. And in the list view, we're seeing the brand and the model. Okay, we also have more information, but we're not displaying it here specifically. But if I click here, I have the brand and the model. So Jeep is the brand, Wrangler is the model. And I also have the price as well, even though it's not being displayed here, okay? And so this particular pattern, the way you implement it is you have this list view here, right? This is the list view here, and you're pulling off records from a database, right? So if we go in here, I have a query collection. We come in here, we're just doing a query of cars. And if we go into my Firestore database, you can see I have cars here, and I have like 10 cars or so. And for each car, I have a bunch of records. I also have a link to the specific user that's associated with the car. Maybe they are the seller of the car, maybe they're the owner of the car, but we have a user ID, right? So if we go back here, we're doing a query. And the most important thing with this pattern, right? This is the key right here is, you know, just this view by itself, it's great, but it doesn't really do anything, right? It doesn't really provide that much value. The key here is that when you are clicking from one view to another, we are passing a parameter, and this is a reference, okay? So we are passing a reference to the detail view, in this case right here. And then the second and most important part of this pattern is that on the detail view, the first thing that we want to do is we want to convert that reference that we got. We want to convert it to a document. So this is the detail view right here. And the first thing that I'm doing up on top, right, all the way on the page level, I'm not doing it somewhere around here. I'm doing it all the way at the page level. I'm doing a document from references. So that way I can pull this car ref, which is the argument that we passed from the list view to this view, and then I'm pulling in the document, because in FlutterFlow there's a concept of a document reference and a document. A document reference is like a pointer to a document. A pointer is great when you're passing different, you know, you just want to pass a document altogether, but anytime you want to pull up the fields and you want to read the data of the document, you want to display it, you need the document itself, right? You need to pull that document information from the pointer, the reference, okay? So on this page right here, we're simply pulling in the details from the document. That's why we're doing this document from reference all the way at the top. Now, another very, very important thing that you're gonna see from time to time is that sometimes you may need to display like document information and all that, but sometimes you need to display something else that's related to another document, another data type. So in this case, remember, we have a user field here. This UID is a reference to a real user field, right? So this LV, beginning with LV, ending with U2, if we go to users, right, this is this user account here, right? This is this James No Code account. And so what we're doing here, this is kind of the corollary of this pattern, is that we are also doing the same thing, but on a smaller scale, right? So here I have a card, this user card. And what I'm doing there is I'm doing the same thing, document from reference, but I'm doing it inside. I'm doing it on child widget because there's only a limited number of widgets that actually need this information. Not all the widgets need this information, like the cases with the card detail, right? In this case, we have a user card, and that's the only thing that needs this user information. So we can pull it in here, and then inside of this user card, right? So for instance, this text field right here, right? We can just pull up the display name of that user record that where we pulled in that document inside of this card, right? So this is kind of a corollary, right, of this main pattern, right? We're pulling in the document information, and then depending on if we need more additional information, we might need to pull in on a lower level, on a lower scope, if you will, on a lower card level, some additional information. So typically you might have a card detail view, and then you might have like a seller card, or you might also have some kind of other card, maybe a couple of cards. You may not have just one card. You may have a couple of cards, maybe 3 cards, maybe 2 cards. And these are going to be UID references on your main record that you're going to pull in on this detail view. Now, the second pattern that I want to talk about is also an important pattern. This is a pattern you're going to see over and over and over again. And this is a pattern that has to do with how do you structure your Firestore data, Firestore information, the records in your Firestore database. So for instance, here we have a view that lists the cars, right? So we have the car brand, the model, and the price all the way down. And the way I have this stored right here is I have a top level cars collection. And then for each car collection, I have a UID that's a reference to a user. Essentially, it's a reference to a specific document inside a user's collection right here in this case. Well, a lot of people may look at this and think to themselves, well, you have a list of cars, but each car has an owner or a seller. So does it really make sense to have a cars as a top level collection? If every single car is owned by somebody, wouldn't it make more sense to have cars as sub-collections for each of the users? Well, sure, that's definitely one way that you can do it. You can take this cars collection and make it as a sub-collection on every single user. So maybe this user owns these cars, or is selling these cars. Maybe this other user is selling those cars, etc., etc. And so the question is, how do you know when you need to make something a top level collection, or you need to make something a sub collection of something else? Well, in my view, it's actually very, very simple. You have to ask yourself, are you going to be displaying a particular collection without any filters, without any references who it may belong to? So for instance, this view right here tells us everything that we need to know, because in this kind of app, we're going to have a view where we're going to list all the cars, or maybe cars with a certain filter, regardless of the users. So here I'm just listing all the cars. I don't really care who the user is. I don't care about anything. I may have a situation where I may have a filter where I'm filtering cars by price, by make, by model, etc. But I'm not filtering them by the users who own them. And so if you're going to have a view like this, where this is a top level view and we're listing cars without much reference, who owns these cars, who the seller is, we're not filtering them by users, then it really does not make much sense to make this cars collection a sub collection of users. This right here is a top level collection. And so that is how you know this is a top level collection, because we essentially have a view that's displaying these records without much regard for anything where you're going to have a sub collection. On the other hand, if we were listing users as our main view, and then we would click on the user, and then inside the user, we are going to list the cars that the user might, be selling or might be owning or anything like that. And we would never have a situation where we would be listing cars all by themselves like I have here. In that case, it would make more sense to make cars under users. And so most of the time, the UI is going to dictate how you're going to structure the database. Right away, when I realized that I'm going to be listing the cars like this and I'm not going to be filtering them by users, even though I have like a user reference for each of these cars, I knew that it doesn't really make sense to make cars anything except a top level collection. On the other hand, if you're going to have something else having to do with a car and you're never going to list that something else by itself, it's only going to be as a sub view, if you will, a detail view of a particular car, then having that something else as a sub collection of cars makes a lot more sense. The next pattern I want to share with you is to use code expressions, but only in specific cases. So here I have a view where I have a value here, and I need to decrement this value by another value. And this is actually built into FlutterFlow, but there is a gotcha, right? So if I have this value and I need to decrement it by 5, I can click this and I'm gonna get 5. I can click again and I'm gonna get 0. I can click again, I'm gonna get -5. So how is this implemented? Well, the first thing that we have here is we have two values that we're using. We're using 10, which is the initial value, and then we have 5, which is the value that we're going to be decrementing the main value by. So if we come back here, right, we have this button here, and if we come in here, all we have is one action. And what we're doing is we're updating app state. And in this case, FlutterFlow gives you the ability to increment or decrement. But the problem here is if you want to decrement something, it tells you that you need to use a negative number to decrement, right? So with a positive, if you want to increment something, you just put in the number, you just put in an expression, whatever. It could be a fixed number, 5, you can pull it from a state, from an API, it doesn't really matter. But if you need to decrement something, it's a little bit more complicated because you need a negative value, right? Because under the hood, they just add them up, right? So with a positive, they just add them together. With a negative, they add them together, and that becomes a subtraction operation, okay? And so the way that you want to do it, the pattern here, right? Something you're going to see over and over and over again is to use a code expression where you're taking the value and you're multiplying by -1. So with the code expression, it needs an argument, right? So the argument in this case is value 2, which is our app state. And once we have the value, we're calling it var1, right? This is the argument, right? We can just call it arg1, so it's easier to kind of see it. Arg1, which is the value that we're passing in, and we're multiplying it by -1. And you can just do check for errors. There should be no problems at all, no errors. And now this is a simple way of decrementing something. And this is just one example of obviously using code expressions. You can use them for so many things. Just remember a couple of things about code expressions. Number one, it just needs one expression, right? You're not going to have return or do this or do that, just the expression. And number two is that you can't reuse them, right? With custom functions, you can create a custom function. You can use it 10 times if you want. Code expressions, you can't really do that, at least not now. You have to code them each time. So if you have the same code expression in your app, you're going to have 5 same code expressions, essentially. I've been using code expressions a lot, and lately it's been mostly about decrementing some kind of value by multiplying it by -1 and using it inside of this increment decrement construct. Now, the next pattern is relatively minor, but it does make a big difference when it comes to user experience. And that is creating delays from the time the user takes an action and the time they're actually seeing the results. Okay, so here we have a view, here we have a page. And if I click on do something, you see it's executing, but there is a slight delay, and then it says succeeded here, and we have a result here, okay? And that delay is actually something that I put in my action. So as you can see, this making an API call, and the API call is exceeded, and we have a delay here, right? We have a 2-second delay. If I remove a delay, right? So let's say I remove a delay and I reload the app, you're gonna see that it's slightly different, and it's up to you to see what you prefer. Right? Now, if I click here, as you can see, it's a lot quicker. Now, this is obviously going to depend on the kind of app you're building, on the kind of functionality you have. But in my personal opinion, the previous way where we instituted the delay, had a much smoother behavior. It just seemed like things flowed a little better than where we got, a response right away, very, very quickly. So this is obviously going to depend on your specific use case, on what exactly you're trying to do. But I can tell you that in many situations, putting in a little bit of a delay right after executing the action just makes things seem better. It's just, the whole thing flows better. So this is going to be obviously at your discretion how you do it. But think about putting in some of the delays, some of the little waits in your actions, and see if you can improve the overall flow of your app for your users. Now, the next cool pattern I want to share with you guys is that you want to be using page state to do some very, very cool things in the behavior of the page. So here we have a list of cars, right? We have a list of different cars. And here we have a filter, right? So in this case, we can filter by Jeep, Tesla, or BMW. So let's say I pick Jeep, and it filters just by Jeep. Let's say I filter by Tesla, and we see that one Tesla, BMW, and we see that one BMW. Now I can also click on here, and that's gonna clear everything, and we're gonna see everything right away. Now this is the type of behavior you're gonna implement over and over and over again, because this is really nice. It's fast, it's reactive. I don't need to reload the page. It's instantaneous. And obviously you can take it a lot further and create interesting effects, interesting flows, but it's all gonna start from here. Now, how is this implemented? Well, actually, it's very, very simple. We have our list view of cars, right? We have a list view here. I'm just doing a backend query. But what I'm doing here is I'm creating a filter, and the filter is we're filtering on car make in this case. And we are filtering on this specific variable. This is a page state variable, right? So if we go in here, and here we have a brand filter, it's a string, no initial value. And what's nice about it is if we go in here, the other thing that you need to do is you need to make sure that your setting ignore empty filter values, because if the filter is empty, which is the case is when you're just starting the app, you haven't chose what you want to filter by, then it's just going to ignore the filter. This is really, really nice functionality. Last but not least, we have this button, and all this button is doing is it's simply resetting the value, right? It's resetting this brand filter value, which is one of the things. You can set value or you can reset value. Very, very nice. So when you click reset, it rebuilds the current page. And also right here, right? If we come in here, we are, once you pick a filter here, we are setting the value here, right? So we are setting the value. Here we are resetting the value, and we're doing rebuilding the current page so that it rebuilds the whole page. And this is very, very simple behavior, but very, very powerful behavior. And obviously you can create, more filters. You can load filters from, I don't know, a database or anything like that. And this is the perfect candidate for a page-based state variable, right? You don't want to do it with an app state variable, right? Because this is a filter is like the quintessential page state variable, right? It's only really, valid on this page. It's not really applicable to any other page. And typically you're going to be creating this kind of behavior all the time. Anytime you have a list, maybe you want to filter the list, maybe you want to search the list, maybe you want to do something where you're doing autocomplete or something, right? You're doing some kind of reactive behavior with the list without, clicking submit and reloading the page and interrupting that reactive user behavior, right? Remember, users really, really love this instantaneous, this reactive behavior. And this pattern allows you to do it very, very quickly, yet it's very, very powerful. Now, this next pattern is about using conditional visibility anytime that you want to display something else on the page without the user needing to go to another page. So here's a very, very simple example. And a little bit later, I'm going to show you a much more complex example so that you can see just what kind of things that you can build. Now, in this example, we have here a page and we have a button. So if I click on this button, it changes the color. If I click again, it changes the color. And in fact, you're not seeing one button, you're actually seeing two buttons. And what we're doing is we are switching which particular button you are seeing right now based on a specific condition, okay? So if we go back to our app, you can see that what I'm doing here, and this is a pattern that I use all the time in my apps, and trust me, it's gonna make your lives a lot easier. There's also an added benefit that I'm gonna talk about in just a second that you're gonna see the value of immediately. But right now what we have here is we have a stack and we have two rows. And what I'm doing is if I'm building something that I want to display selectively, whether I want to display, variant A or variant B or maybe variant C, I first create that variant. And then what I do is I wrap it inside of a stack. And once I have it inside of a stack, I can just duplicate it, right? So in this case, I have one row. I wrapped it inside of a stack. I can just right click here, and what I do, I can wrap it and I can click on stack. I already have it inside of a stack. And once I have it wrapped inside of a stack, I can duplicate it many, many times. You can't really do that before you wrap it, inside of a stack, because depending on the configuration, you might not have, be able to do like 3 rows just by themselves. But once one of them becomes a child of the stack, you can duplicate them as much as you want. So I can have, 15 different rows. It's a stack. A stack, accepts a children of other widgets. So it accepts multiple number of widgets below it, right? And so what I have here is I have a stack and then I have various rows. And in this example, all I have here is I have a page state variable called select. Okay, so by default, it's not select. Okay, so it's false, right? It's a Boolean variable. It can be true or false. In this case, it's false, right? The initial field value is false. And what I'm doing here is, so depending on, if it's true, I may display this row. If it's false, I may display another row. So in this case, right, all I have to do is go to conditional visibility and I see that this row is going to be displayed if selected is true. So by default, it's not going to display this row because on page load, selected is false. So it's going to display the other row. So if I go to this row, this is displaying that not selected, right? When selected is false, which is the case is by default. And then each button simply changes the state, right? All I'm doing is I'm setting selected to non-selected, meaning I'm toggling it, right? So if selected is true, it's going to be false and vice versa. And same thing with this button as well, right? I'm just toggling it. And that is why you're kind of seeing this behavior, right? You're kind of seeing this behavior back and forth, back and forth. Now, a big benefit of this pattern is the fact that, sometimes you don't have an option, right? So in this case, if you come to this button right here, if you go to details, properties, right? You can see that the color, FlutterFlow allows me to set the color dynamically, right? So I can click here and just, get color from string or get it from database or app state or somewhere. This means that I can set it while the app is running, right? But in many other situations, you can't set it dynamically. So for instance, width, I can't set it dynamically. Elevation, I can't set it dynamically. Height, I can't do it dynamically. Border color, I can. Border width, I cannot. So some things I can set dynamically, other things I cannot set dynamically. And so what this means is that if there's something that you can't set dynamically, this is the only method that allows you to do it, okay? Even in situations where you can't set it dynamically, still, this is a great method because you can create multiple copies of it and then display, one or the other selectively based on a specific condition. I do this all the time. And in fact, in the next example, I'm going to show you the kinds of things that you can do, the kinds of interesting things that you can build using this method. Now, in this last, but definitely not least pattern, I want to show you the kinds of interesting things that you can build by combining some of the techniques that we talked about in this video. So here we have pattern number 7, and this allows you to build a wizard, form wizard, where you have multiple steps that you need to complete before you submit the data. So instead of looking at a form that has 30 different inputs, 30 different text inputs, you're essentially going through different steps and completing different, and completing a set amount of fields on each step. So here we have step 1. You may be asking for like a first name, last name, location. You click next. Step 2, it dynamically loads the next fields, maybe age, interest, favorite city. Next, step 3, and in this case we only have 3 steps. Field 1, field 2, field 3, and then you can click submit, and you can see form is submitted. Now, how exactly did I build something like this? Well, let me show you. Let's go ahead and take a look at this page right here. This is pattern number 7. And what we are doing here is we are creating multiple list views because we need to load that data from a Firestore database. So this is how I'm storing this data. I have my forms collection, and I have one document, which is one form. And then I have my steps collection, okay? And inside the steps collection, I have 3 documents that stand for 3 steps. So I have step 1 here, step 1. I have step 2 with the different fields for each step, and then the different fields for this step as well. And so if we go back to the app, what we have here is we have a list view, and I'm doing a query of all the steps. And then I'm doing another query right here of the fields for that step, right? I'm pulling in the fields for that steps, and I'm displaying the fields because the fields, as the case is, they're essentially an array, right? So I can pull them in using this generating children from variable functionality. Very, very useful. And then depending on which step the person is on, we need to display the button. So if they're on the first step, we don't need to display that previous button. If they're in the last step, we don't need to display the next button. Also, if they're on the last step, we need to display the submit button. We're not going to display the submit button until they reach the last step. So I'm using lots of different patterns in order to build this amazing flow, I would say. A lot of people have asked me, how do you build a wizard? How do you build a step wizard? And this is a very, very simple way of building a wizard. So we have a couple of rows at the bottom where we are, holding in the buttons, and these are like containers for buttons. So we have a row that has the previous, next, and then we have a row that has submit. So for this row right here, we have a button, and what we want to do is we have conditional visibility, and we want to display this button unless current step is 1. So, if current step is not 1, we're going to display this button. And so this is displayed unless current step is 1. It's displayed in all other situations. And this button is the opposite, right? It's displayed right here. It's displayed for all situations unless it's the last step, step 3, okay? And then we have this row at the bottom. And in this case, we have the whole row, and that row contains the submit button, and we're only displaying it if current step is equal to 3. Now, obviously, you can configure it. Remember, we have a list of steps in that collection of forms. So you can pull in, a list of steps and have it dynamically. So it doesn't need to be 3. Maybe you have 5 steps. You can pull that in dynamically by simply, counting the number of documents in that specific collection. Very, very easy. And so we're doing a couple of things here, and the end result is we have a nice wizard that's very, very customizable. You can display the step number. You can display any kind of fields. You can also, configure the kind of fields you're going to be displaying. So I have field 1, field 2, field 3. You can change that, and you can also specify whether this is a string, an integer, an email, or something else. And then when you're pulling the data, you can display the right field there. And guess what? Guess how you're going to do it. So remember, right here, right? This is a text field. But let's say you need to display like maybe like a select field or like a radio button. Well, guess what you're going to do? You're going to do it using conditional visibility. You're going to create multiple, and depending on the type of the field that's specified in the database, you're going to make that displayed. You're going to make that conditional visible. You're going to set conditional visibility on that to true and everything else to false. And you can do that all dynamically. You can do it all at runtime as the user is using your app and putting some input into the form and going through the motions, going through the steps of filling out the form. And so this is a really nice example which allows you to create like a step wizard using the patterns that we talked about in today's video. Now, if you guys enjoyed this video and you're thinking to yourself, these are some awesome patterns, I want to use these patterns in my apps, or maybe I want to use this form wizard, or I want to use some of these other patterns you talked about, then you definitely need to view and or clone this app. This is the only way you'll be able to easily take the stuff that I have here in front of me and integrate it into the apps that you may be building right now, or maybe you're going to be building in the future. And the only way that you can do that is by joining our amazing Patreon community. And when you join our amazing Patreon community, you're not going to get access to just this app. You're going to get access to all the apps that I built here on my channel, all the FlutterFlow apps, as well as some of the other apps with other no-code builders. But that's not all. You also get access to extra content such as Q&As, live streams, our amazing Patreon-only masterclass series where I do a deep dive on a specific topic that the community might be struggling with. So the community votes on a specific topic, and I do a deep dive on that topic and make it available for our amazing, incredible Patreon members. And so if all of that sounds like something you may be interested in, maybe you want to build no-code apps for a living, or maybe you want to build them for yourself, then you definitely owe it to yourself to check out our amazing Patreon community and consider becoming a member. So I definitely hope to see you there real soon. Now, if you guys enjoyed this video and you're looking for more videos where I give you some amazing tips and tricks that are going to save you hours and hours of time, of development time, of heartache and everything like that, then check out the video you are viewing in the corner of your screen right now.